on page 197. Can you hear me okay? The foundation of all the divine religions is one. All are based upon reality. Reality does not admit plurality. Yet amongst mankind there have arisen differences concerning the manifestations of God. Some have been Zoroastrians, some are Buddhists, some Jews, Christians, Muslims. This has become a source of divergence, whereas the teachings of the holy souls who founded the divine religions are one in essence and reality. All these have served the world of humanity. All have summoned souls to peace and accord. All have proclaimed the virtues of humanity. All have guided souls to the attainment of perfections. Abdu'l-Baha. Having in the last chapter correlated Kuhn's stages with the Baha'i paradigm of the oneness of religion, we will now explore the specific features of the Baha'i premise of progressive revelation as articulated by Baha'u'llah and expounded by Abdu'l-Baha and subsequently by Shoghi Effendi. Within it, inconsistencies are resolved. Each religion finds its anticipated fulfillment and its rightful place. It provides a dynamic framework for the attainment of interreligious understanding essential to the construction of a viable world civilization based on spiritual principles. In the realm of matter, the quest of science for that elusive unified theory of everything remains yet unfulfilled. In the spiritual realm, the quest for that unified premise of religions finds its fulfillment at long last in the Baha'i principle of progressive revelation. The Baha'i worldview on interrelationship among religions is represented by the principle of continuing progressive revelation. This view honors and embraces them all. Within this overarching principle, the seemingly discordant doctrines find their resolution. The Baha'i worldview is an expanding paradigm which requires a major shift, an expansion in one's perception, from one which confines divine truth to one religion to one that places it at the center of all religions, to be disclosed progressively over time.
May I make a comment here? I think this is such an important point as we are talking to followers of different religions, what is actually meant by the Baha'i principle of progressive revelation. I think that one sentence captures a lot. Anyway, I'm wondering if anyone would like to have a discussion on that, whether in agreement with what was just said or not so. And what is the reality? Do you find that people accept a model whereby encompasses all the validity and truth of all religions or not? Because that's a major drawback. It's a major obstacle in my view.
I think it is important to have a discussion on this, especially because you alluded to this whole adopting a new paradigm right in chapter 8. So you mentioned that as soon as we have a belief, we have to adopt this new paradigm within that belief system. And I think that's imperative. And I personally would love for you to elaborate on that, just for because of the whole oneness of religion. And you opened up with a beautiful quote from Abdu'l-Baha, right? Who speaks about all these different religions. And I think having the full measure of understanding that, I think it would help me personally.
I think that each one of us has probably an added perspective on this, but I have found this a very difficult point to get across when we're talking to followers of other religions. What does Baha'i principle of progressive revelation mean? And why is it that we honor all of the religions, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrian faith, Islamic faith, and also the Hindu and Buddhist as well? So I think an appreciation of that and seeing that all-encompassing truth that is given to humankind in measured amounts, depending on the circumstances of the place, tradition, and also time, in particular of time. And so if we adopt that view, then I think it's likely that we would be more open to accepting a religion that is the Baha'i faith at modern times that is applicable to our times. And those in future generations, hopefully, will be more accepting of a religion which is more adaptable to those particular times, whatever those may be. Definitely, in many centuries, they may be different from our perspectives, and their needs are bound to be different from ours.
Thank you. Derek, please unmute yourself and turn on your video when you ask your question.
Well, I was going to say, I think the reason that it's hard is because, especially with Christianity and Islam, well, for Christianity, there's, somewhere in the Bible where Jesus says the way is through me. So they interpret that to mean the only way is through Jesus. The only, and then Muslims have this whole idea of the Muhammad being the last prophet, and there can be no more revelation after Muhammad. So I think that is the problem when you talk about progressive revelation with Christians and Muslims, is they got to get past that in their in what how they believe, or how they interpret the Quran and the Bible.
And yet there are so many passages, both in Quran and in the New Testament, as well as the Old Testament. I'm not that familiar with the Old Testament, but I do know in the New Testament, there are so many passages that lead to thinking that the revelation is going to continue on. And in fact, there are specific passages whereby it's anticipated what that would be. Of course, all of these are given in quote form. Jesus always talked about his coming back. And in fact, it was to the extent that around mid-19th century, there were many across the world, including Swedenborg, including quite a few, a whole list of individuals who felt that the anticipation and prophecy of Jesus Christ was to take on form at that particular time. And of course, as Baha'is, we know, that indeed did happen. But because all of those prophecies were disguised in special metaphors or special examples, for example, that he would come down on a cloud and this would happen and that would happen, because they were to be proposed in that fashion. But then some of biblical scholars had, in fact, in reality, tried to break those codes. And some of them, such as William Miller, in fact, anticipated that the Advent would be in mid-19th century.
In addition to what has already been said, I think it's important to remember that those of, Christian background, and also I'm not so sure with Muslim, but I think so, and other religions, is that we are kind of conditioned to see our religion as our family. We're asked to see our father, and I think that's an image in most religions. So I think that the emotional tug it's significant, and I think we just have to kind of work with that, because I think my brother-in-law, he keeps asking me, he's a Catholic, does Baha'u'llah talk about Jesus? And I can say, well, yeah, and then send him a list of everything that, was ever said that I can find, in the writings. But it's still, that's the intellectual knowledge is not enough. It's the emotional thing that I think is holding him back.
Yes, or the expectation that any of those anticipations would be fulfilled in a literal sense. For example, when it happened, the declaration of the Bab took place in Shiraz. At that time, there were those who were waiting on a mountain town, waiting for it to happen. They were seeing in a literal sense whereas its significance was otherwise. And they were thinking about it, that it had to take place in the North American continent, whereas it happened elsewhere. And then at that very same time, I think many of you are aware that the first telegraphic code was also sent. And what did those words bear? What God hath wrought. So it actually announced the coming of the fulfillment of God's promise. I'm sure that many of you are aware of that. The first Morse telegraphic code, what God has wrought. The event was so significant that I understand that many actually put on white robes. Many followers of William Miller went to a mountaintop in Pennsylvania, awaiting the Advent to take place exactly as Jesus Christ has foretold. That is, Jesus Christ coming on a cloud to planet Earth. And all of that was symbolic. I'm sure many of you know that the cloud means that which obscures the view of reality. So Jesus Christ came down in the fulfillment through the Blessed Bob with a physical body, and a physical body always obscures the reality within. This is my understanding from Baha'i writings. Maybe there are others who want to also contribute to that thought.
Yeah. Derek?
Yes, the Seventh-day Adventists started with because they believed that Jesus was supposed to come back in 1844, as a matter of fact. But again, they were looking for that, and when it didn't happen literally, that's when. But they still believed. But the religion was founded based on the belief that that was supposed to happen. But they were waiting on the literal, as you say, him to come down in the clouds.
By the way, William Miller was not the only one.
Mm.
There were other Adventists. There was Swedenborg who foretold that. There's a whole list of them. We say William Miller because it's an excellent example how one can get deluded by the literal meaning of a prophecy.
Patsy, if you could continue, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Essential features of the Baha'i premise of progressive revelation. The Baha'i doctrine of progressive revelation includes several fundamental convictions. It asserts that divine truth is absolute and that its revelation through the divine educators is progressive over time. It affirms that revelation of divine knowledge has been continuous throughout history through Krishna, Buddha, Zoroaster, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah, the prophet founders of whom history bears record. These educators are from the same divine source. Their mission is to effect the regeneration of the individual and society, and to provide solutions to the urgent needs of their specific age. At this point in the course of history, when our planet has become an interdependent unit, the great religions of the world can, at long last, come together in harmony and oneness. The concept of continuing progressive revelation is implicit in the sacred scriptures of all the great religions of the world. In the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish biblical canon, the Christian New Testament, and the Muslim Quran, as well as the Hindu, Buddhist, and Zoroastrian sacred texts. The Baha'i principle of oneness of religion is one common faith that acknowledges the validity of all the great religions of the world. Its specific mission is to transform human society and to provide guidance for its transition to a viable global civilization based on spiritual principles. Revelation is progressive and continuing. Following are few excerpts from Baha'i sacred writings on the doctrine of the oneness of religion. These selections proclaim that divine revelation is progressive and continuing, that religious truth is not absolute but relative, and that the revelation of Baha'u'llah is the latest link in the chain of ever-continuing revelations. Abdu'l-Baha writes, religion is the outer expression of the divine reality. Therefore, it must be living, vitalized, moving, and progressive. If it be without motion and non-progressive, it is without the divine life. It is dead. The divine institutes are continuously active and evolutionary. Therefore, the revelation of them must be progressive and continuous. Shoghi Effendi explains the fundamental principle enunciated by Baha'u'llah is that religious truth is not absolute but relative, that divine revelation is a continuous and progressive process, that all the great religions of the world are divine in origin, that their basic principles are in complete harmony, that their aims and purposes are one and the same, that their teachings are but facets of one truth, that their functions are complementary, that they differ only in the non-essential aspects of their doctrines, and that their missions represent successive stages in the spiritual evolution of human society. The revelation identified with Baha'u'llah unhesitatingly acknowledges itself to be but one link in the chain of continually progressive revelations, supplements their teachings with such laws and ordinances as conform to the imperative needs and are dictated by the growing receptivity of a fast evolving and constantly changing society, and proclaims its readiness and ability to fuse and incorporate the contending sects and factions into which they have fallen into a universal fellowship, functioning within the framework and in accordance with the precepts of a divinely conceived, a world unifying, a world redeeming order. Two diagrams are used to explain the Baha'i doctrine of the oneness of religions and the interrelationship among them. Figure 1 is a diagram grammatic diagrammatic diagrammatic representation of the Baha'i principle of progressive revelation. The disclosure of truth through the divine educators is progressive and continuous over time. The circles seen at this angle as ovals represent divine revelations, those of which history bears record through successive dispensations brought by the divine educators, Krishna, Buddha, Zoroaster, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and the twin manifestations, the Bab and Baha'u'llah. For the manifestations, see the glossary. These educators, in response to the requirements of time and place, disclose progressively ampler measures of divine guidance to humanity. They all are centered on the same divine core, whose scope is infinite, represented by the infinity symbol. This core includes those essential eternal verities. Among these are belief in ultimate reality, God, the human soul, and the innate spiritual reality of man. These core truths are also imparted to man incrementally over time in greater and greater abundance than that which had been conveyed through previous revelations. In Figure 1 draws attention to the importance of perspective, that is, the need to acquire a refined point of view when looking at religions. In this figure, we note that a head-on view through the common axis connecting their core may be represented by the inset figure in the upper right corner. This inset represents religions as concentric circles surrounding the same common core. This view calls attention to common features shared by all religions. The reflection on this image may enhance one's appreciation of the essential connection and relationship among religions. All these great religions of the world, in essence, have that common core. They are all from the same divine source, and they revolve around the same reality. Figure 2. It is an enlargement of the insert in Figure 1. This diagram similarly highlights the common features shared by all religions in several aspects. As discussed, the concentric circles all encompass the same radiant common core, the eternal verities, represented by the star. These are surrounded in turn by common areas shared by consecutive religions, such as the Golden Rule, justice, rectitude of character, and other ethical and spiritual principles. Do you want me to continue?
We could pass it to Christine.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Patsy.
Mhm.
Furthermore, there is also an additional area in each successive religion. These represent the guidance each provides in response to the specific requirements of the time, the imperative needs of a fast evolving and constantly changing society. The fundamental mission of a religion, in addition to the regeneration of the individual and society, is to provide solutions to the challenges and urgent needs of its time. These diagrams draw attention to the two aspects of religion: the fundamental, those eternal verities which remain changeless, and the teachings which evolve over time in response to the requirements of time, place, and conditions of life. Abdu'l-Baha elucidates these two distinct aspects of religion. The divine law has two distinct aspects or functions: one, the essential or fundamental; the other, the material or accidental. The first aspect of the revealed religion of God is that which concerns the ethical development and spiritual progress of mankind, the awakening of potential human susceptibilities, and the descent of divine bestowals. These ordinances are changeless, essential, eternal. The second function of the divine religion deals with material conditions, the laws of human intercourse and social regulation. These are subject to change and transformation in accordance with the time, place, and conditions. He further explains, the foundation of the religion of God remains permanent and unchanging. It is that fixed foundation which ensures the progress and stability of the body politic and the illumination of humanity. It has ever been the cause of love and justice amongst men. It works for the true fellowship and unification of all mankind, for it never changes and is not subject to supersedure. The accidental or non-essential laws which regulate the transactions of the social body and everyday affairs of life are changeable and subject to abrogation. In the history of religions, there are numerous examples of such non-essential laws which were subject to change. Among them, in the Jewish religion, is the law on plurality of wives and laws and ordinances on theft and murder. Abdu'l-Baha explains that such laws were in keeping with the conditions of the times, but not compatible with conditions of the present day. His Holiness Moses lived in the wilderness and desert of Sinai. Therefore, his ordinances and commandments were in conformity with those conditions. Our particular time requires divine guidance that can speak to the needs of a global age. The Baha'i paradigm of the oneness of religion makes sense of religious diversity. It imparts an expansive worldview that emphasizes the evolutionary and progressive features of religions. Figure 2 shows the circles representing religions as progressively larger over time. The outermost circle representing the dispensation of Baha'u'llah is the largest. Here, a word of caution is needed. The largest circle represents an ampler measure of revealed truth disclosed to humanity through its revelation by Baha'u'llah. This does not signify superior merit, but rather its direct relevance to the specific conditions and the evolving needs of humanity, an age infinitely more advanced, as Shoghi Effendi expounds. If the light that is now streaming forth upon an increasingly responsive humanity with a radiance that bids fair to eclipse the splendor of such triumphs as the forces of religion have achieved in days past, if the signs and tokens which proclaimed its advent have been, in many respects, unique in the annals of past revelations, if its votaries have evinced traits and qualities unexampled in the spiritual history of mankind, these should be attributed not to a superior merit, which the faith of Baha'u'llah, as a revelation isolated and alien from any previous dispensation, might possess, but rather should be viewed and explained as the inevitable outcome of the forces that have made of this present age an age infinitely more advanced, more receptive, and more insistent to receive an ampler measure of divine guidance that has hitherto been vouchsafed to mankind. Lot there. Divine revelation continues into the future. Figure 2 also calls attention to the continuation of divine revelation into the future. The outward directed arrows in this figure emphasize that revelation through the divine educators will continue into the future, beyond the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. The principle of the oneness of religion proclaimed by Baha'u'llah precludes any claim to finality in revelation. God's truth is infinite. Thus, it can never be disclosed in totality. Furthermore, the needs and challenges of an ever-developing and changing world require continuation of divine guidance into the future. Thus, one of the major barriers, religious exclusivity, is removed for all time. Shoghi Effendi cautions categorically against any notion of finality in revelation. Such a claim is an inexcusable departure from the fundamental principle of progressive revelation. It should also be borne in mind that, great as is the power manifested by this revelation, and however vast the range of the dispensation its author has inaugurated, it emphatically repudiates the claim to be regarded as the final revelation of God's will and purpose for mankind. To hold such a conception of its character and functions would be tantamount to a betrayal of its cause and a denial of its truth. It must necessarily conflict with the fundamental principle which constitutes the bedrock of Baha'i belief. The principle that religious truth is not absolute but relative, that divine revelation is orderly, continuous, and progressive, and not spasmodic or final. Indeed, the categorical rejection by the followers of the faith of Baha'u'llah of the claim to finality which any religious system inaugurated by the prophets of the past may advance is as clear and emphatic as their own refusal to claim that same finality for the revelation with which they stand identified. Quoting the words of Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi continues, "To believe that all revelation is ended, that the portals of divine mercy are closed, that from the daysprings of eternal holiness no sun shall rise again, that the ocean of everlasting bounty is forever stilled, and that out of the tabernacle of ancient glory the messengers of God have ceased to be made manifest, must constitute in the eyes of every follower of the faith a grave and inexcusable departure from one of its most cherished and fundamental principles." And elsewhere he reiterates, "Nor does Baha'u'llah claim finality for his own revelation, but rather stipulates that a fuller measure of the truth he has been commissioned by the Almighty to vouchsafe to humanity at so critical a juncture in its fortunes must needs be disclosed at future stages in the constant and limitless evolution of mankind." Should I continue? Okay.
Please.
The culmination of the Adamic cycle. The revelation of the Bab marks the termination of the Adamic cycle, the cycle of religious revelations which started with Adam. The revelation of Baha'u'llah marks the inauguration of the Baha'i cycle. Baha'u'llah extols the chain of successive revelations in the Adamic cycle. Contemplate with thine inward eye the chain of successive revelations that hath linked the manifestation of Adam with that of the Bab. I testify before God that each one of these manifestations hath been sent down through the operation of the divine will and purpose, that each hath been the bearer of a specific message, that each hath been entrusted with a divinely revealed book and been commissioned to unravel the mysteries of a mighty tablet. The measure of the revelation with which every one of them hath been identified had been definitely foreordained. This verily is a token of our favor unto them, if ye be of those that comprehend this truth. The Adamic cycle includes the Hindu, Buddhist, Zoroastrian, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic revelations, ending with the Bab. Shoghi Effendi refers to the culmination of this cycle. The faith of Baha'u'llah should indeed be regarded, if we wish to be faithful to the tremendous implications of its message, as the culmination of a cycle, the final stage in a series of preliminary and progressive revelations. These, beginning with Adam and ending with the Bab, have paved the way and anticipated with an ever-increasing emphasis the advent of that day of days, in which he who is the promise of all ages should be made manifest. Divine truth in the Adamic cycle was disclosed progressively over the dimensions of time and space. The Hindu and Buddhist faiths appeared in a part of the world which was geographically isolated from that which was the origin of the Zoroastrian, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Baha'i, and Baha'i faiths. It should also be noted at this point that in addition to these known divine educators of whom history bears record, there were other manifestations. Divine guidance has always been made available to humankind. This point is emphasized through a letter written on behalf of Shoghi Effendi. The only reason there is not more mention of the Asiatic prophets is because their names seem to be lost in the mists of ancient history. We are taught there always have been manifestations of God, but we do not have any record of their names. At this particular point in the history of humankind, advances in science and technology have annihilated distance. Our globe has become one entity. All religions can now come together in one common faith. Thus, the anticipations of both lines of religions find their fulfillment. The Hindu and Buddhist religions, whose origin is India, attained the fulfillment of their prophecies in the Baha'i faith. The advent anticipated in their sacred scriptures. The Zoroastrian, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic religions, whose origin is the Middle East, also attained their fulfillment in the Baha'i faith. In this global age, the designations Eastern and Western, commonly used in reference to the two respective lines of religion, are no longer applicable, nor are they meaningful. All of these great religions are within the compass of the Adamic cycle, with Muhammad the seal, the end of that cycle, linked to the manifestation of the Bab. Shoghi Effendi explains the pivotal position of the advent of the Bab in the Adamic cycle. He who was, in the words of Abdu'l-Baha, the morn of truth and harbinger of the most great light, whose advent at once signalized the termination of the prophetic cycle and the inception of the cycle of fulfillment. And the Baha'i writer Adib Taherzadeh describes the unique placement of the advent of the Bab in the course of religious history. He stood in between two religious cycles. With his advent, he closed, on the one hand, the prophetic cycle, which began with Adam as the first manifestation of God in recorded history, and ended with the dispensation of Islam, and on the other, he opened the cycle of fulfillment, whose duration, according to the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha will be at least 5,000 centuries. Baha'u'llah has initiated the Baha'i cycle, the cycle of fulfillment. The specific mission of the Baha'i faith is to address the urgent needs of this age, a time when geographical isolation no longer poses barriers in a global age.
Thank you, Christine. Derek, would you mind? We're on page 206. And does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes, please, Christine.
This is really a very dense passage for me. A lot to unpack here. First of all, I really appreciate these diagrams. I think these are really great because, the figure one with progression over time on page 200 and 201, because I think it is so dimensional. There's a dimensionality about progressive revelation that is hard to explain in words. So thank you for this because I think this will help in teaching people about progressive revelation. Secondly, I want to reread this because The Guardian, as always, is so multi-dimensional. And what he was talking about, I knew it was, it's very deep. And that quote on page, I think it's on page 202. I'm going to reread it, but there was a word too that I'd never, supersedure. Does anybody know what that means?
What is that? I
It's on page 202. And
Yeah.
I think
I just Googled it. It's the act of replacing something with something superior.
okay, great. Okay, that makes it
Yeah.
much more easy to understand. Yeah, but thank you. That's it.
Yeah. I actually wanna just mention and what you're mentioning, Christine, comes from the World Order of Baha'u'llah from Shoghi Effendi, and that was from 202 and 203. But Dr. Khodadad already has all of the footnotes perfectly organized in the back of the book. What I appreciated, I always found it difficult, and I sincerely mean this, I always found it difficult to explain. I always would say, like the Bab, trying to explain why there was the Bab and Baha'u'llah, right? I'm always likening it to Joseph and Jesus Christ. But the way you picked, of course, with your research and finding this, of course, beautiful writer, Adib Taherzadeh, I just adore him. But the way you said how he stood in between two religious cycles, and because it's easy now to explain, like, and on one hand the way you just picked that beautiful selection, I think it's a great way for me to try to reread that, be more familiar with it, if not memorize it. So, to just say it. And then just to go back to what you said about the first Morse message, it's really important to bring that to life and let that be part of our language, because it's amazing how the declaration of the Bab was May 23rd, and then the first Morse message, as you mentioned, Dr. Khodadad, is the very next day, May 24th of 1844, and it has that message. So these are things that when you say that what God had wrought, these are things that open up conversations, right? So I think it's impeccable. It's beautiful. I will always keep saying thank you for taking the time out of your so busy schedule to put this book together for us. I think it's so important. Yeah, I love it. Because I never ever even knew this. So, this is great.
may I add a point here? I tried at one time to see May 23rd, 1844 in the city of Shiraz. What would exactly coincide in terms of the planet, the revolution of planet, whether it would actually end up being exactly the same time as the Morse code. But I didn't follow that through. It could be possible because we are in two different parts of the world and the rotation of planet Earth. Maybe it was even closer. Right now, we may think that they're farther apart, maybe by a day, but maybe not. I tried to investigate that point, but not sure about the outcome. Anyway.
No, I have to say this because I'm fascinated with dates and numbers, and I think a lot of things coincided with that day. And I remember I saw it somewhere, and I think I even put something together, but I just don't remember right now, so I don't want to be wrong. But I'm just sure, he's too perfect for things to not have a reason and a rhyme for it.
Thank you.
Derek, if you would unmute yourself, please. Thank you so much. So we're on page 206, the temperament of a respective time.
The temperament of a respective time. The temperament of the culture of a respective time to which prophet founders brought divine revelation is essential to an appreciation of the progressive character of their mission. These educators disclosed only a set portion of divine truth to tribes and cultures which were at differing levels of development and receptivity. Muhammad came to dissenting tribes of idol worshippers, while Jesus Christ came to the monotheistic Jewish people. The magnitude of divine revelation through Muhammad in an isolated Arabia amidst the peoples and tribes of his time should be readily apparent. Through the transforming influence of his message, the idolaters became monotheists. The revelation of Muhammad induced in these people a significant level of advancement as a quantum leap toward the attainment of human destiny. Progress in science and technology since the mid-19th century has introduced significant changes in all dimensions of human life, requiring the adoption of an expansive worldview which can be responsive to the temper and tenor of our times. The Baha'i doctrine of the oneness of religion and progressive revelation is fundamental to such a worldview. Among those who have embraced this paradigm, many have dedicated their lives and resources to its promotion. Yet, on the other hand, it has met with opposition and rejection by those dedicated to the doctrine of finality of truth and exclusivity of salvation in their respective religions. As we have before seen, rejection and opposition to a new paradigm often precedes its acceptance, adoption, and assimilation. Increasing religious fanaticism has given rise to a grave situation in our world. This is especially critical in our times as the forces of globalization are on the move and are rapidly accelerating. The realities of our age pose significant challenges to misconceived and misconstrued doctrines of exclusivity promoted by many followers of the major religions of the world. On one hand, globalization has resulted in more tenacious adherence to those literal beliefs, thus intensifying the fundamentalism, militancy, and aggressiveness. On the other hand, its challenges have raised questions and inspired interest in the significance and diversity of religions. There is a notable increase in interfaith activities and organizations vested with the noble mission of improving dialogue, understanding, and fellowship among religions, and finding resolution to the interreligious conflicts that prevail in our global society. All such endeavors draw concentrated attention to the urgent need for an all-encompassing worldview that can explain and address religious multiplicity and diversity. There is a dire need for a belief system that can unify all religions. Leo Tolstoy, the eminent Russian writer and philosopher of the earliest 20th century, had an intense desire to address this desperate need to such an extent that he considered devising a universal religion that would include all religions. However, the enormity of this task is such that only the word of God The divine elixir has the dynamic power to bring into reality such a monumental mission. The time for adoption and integration of the Baha'i principle of the oneness of religion is now. It was not relevant before. Shoghi Effendi writes that the revelation brought by Jesus Christ focused attention primarily on the redemption of the individual and the molding of his conduct, and stressed as a central theme the necessity of inculcating a high standard of morality and discipline into man as the fundamental unit in human society. Nowhere in the Gospels do we find any reference to the unity of nations or the unification of mankind as a whole. When Jesus spoke to those around him, he addressed them primarily as individuals rather than as component parts of one universal, indivisible entity. Shoghi Effendi emphasizes this point. What other interpretations can be given to these words addressed specifically by Baha'u'llah to the followers of the gospel, in which the fundamental distinction between the mission of Jesus Christ concerning primarily the individual and his own message, directed more particularly to mankind as a whole, has been definitely established. Verily, he, Jesus, said, "Come ye after me, and I will make you to become fishers of men." In this day, however, we say, "Come ye after me, that we may make you to become the quickeners of mankind." The knowledge of our planet Earth was limited. The concept of one globe and one human race did not exist before. Our knowledge of the geography of our world has significantly expanded ever since the mariners sailed the oceans on their voyages of discoveries. The forces of globalization have rapidly accelerated since 1844 with the advent of the dispensations of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. The image of our Earth as one entity is a recent view seen for the first time in 1969 when astronauts first landed on the moon. Our times demand the adoption of an all-encompassing worldview, inclusive of all religions and all peoples. Any view that is exclusive, limiting truth to one religion, will be incapable of bringing together the diverse sectors of humanity. The principle of the Baha'i faith on the oneness of religion provides that longed-for doctrine. It is anticipated that once this principle is widely known and integrated into the consciousness of the inhabitants of this planet, significant acceleration in the growth of the Baha'i faith will ensue. As religion is a potent force in civilization, it possesses such dynamism as to quicken mankind, to transform human society and culture. The Baha'i principle of continuing progressive revelation has momentous implications. It can revolutionize mindsets, marking a turning point in the fortunes of humankind. There are numerous examples of revolutionary breakthroughs in the domain of biology. The discovery of the structure of DNA, as shown through the data of Watson, Crick, Wilkins, and Franklin, transformed the field. This new model of DNA provided the framework for major advances, leading to the prospects for the betterment and refinement of human life. In the domain of religion, the Baha'i principle of the oneness of religion sets the high point. It has significant implications for inspiring individuals to arise and fulfill their inherent nobility. It can transform and transmute mindsets and civilizations. It can quicken the human race toward the attainment of its destiny.
Yes, Teresa, please.
I see this as a nice way to take some of these paragraphs for reflections gathering in the communities, because what we've been given is a language, and we grope sometimes, like, how do I explain this? Where are the like-minded people like myself? And Jena has done a fabulous job of giving us utterance. We have a way to speak about the faith in a manner that's fluid. It directs the person who's asking about the faith to delve deeper. It inspires that independent investigation of the truth. It acknowledges the fact that science and religion agree. there's so many things that fall into this body of work that I just personally want to say thank you for giving me a voice.
Thank you. I thank you so very much.